we'd have a sniper overwatch on the tower. We took all 3 of them down. The largest single mission in naval special warfare history.
All right, Mike Ritland, thank you for coming on the podcast, man. Second episode, and I needed to have you on for this one.
I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here, and I love the whole operation you have going on.
Thanks,
so thanks for having me.
So you got some stem work done on the knee, right?
Yep.
Right before you, I just make sure that you're getting well taken care of.
Yeah.
Because later on we are going to train.
Yeah.
And we'll do some things. And I heard that you are still training consistently, right?
Oh yeah. I definitely take a marathon approach to it. You know, I don't train nearly as intense as I did. I mean, there's still, I would say, days or even rounds that I'll train kind of full intensity, but I try to just be consistent and stay active and keep moving.
For sure. Let's take a step back, right? So 15, 16 years old, you were already planning on going into the military, right? You've always had that in mind. 18, you went into the Navy, went to SEALs, went to BUDS training. How did that all come about? Why did you decide, okay, this is the route that I'm going to take?
So it started with both of my grandfathers were in World War II, and for me, I was just always fascinated by A, that period in history, and B, kind of that greatest generation's contribution to our country, the American society, and thinking of kind of like from a big picture standpoint, how important of a role all of those guys played in kind of where we're at now as an 18-year-old. And so, one, I was fascinated by it. Two, I kind of wanted to pay it forward and just serve my country. And I've always been I would say, a biggest bang for your buck kind of mentality when it comes to really all decisions. I always try to maximize.
Hold on. Sorry about that. You gotta get this bug, man. I was about to chopstick his ass.
Like a Mr. Miyagi. So, you know, being like, my philosophy has always been, you know, really with whether it's a micro decision or a major life decision, is trying to be as efficient and effective as possible and getting the most bang for your buck. And so, you know, I knew I wanted to serve my country. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish that. For me, I grew up competitively swimming. I was pretty comfortable in the water. And my mom was a big advocate of joining the Navy just because her dad was in the Navy in World War II. And so that, coupled with reading a few books, I saw this like Popular Mechanics article that had this whole layout of the SEAL teams and kind of what they were about. And for me, it was kind of the light switch moment, I think, is knowing I wanted to do it, being comfortable in the water. And then I see this article in that magazine that talked about their missions, their equipment, you know, how tough the training was. And I think for a lot of young men, you know, when you see something as simple as this is the training that it's the toughest training that the U.S. military has to offer, like that little toughest, you know, like that one thing, you know, makes somebody who's competitive say, well, I want to do it then, you know. And so not to say that all the other, you know, special operations training pipelines aren't, you know, I would say probably is equally difficult. But I think with BUDS, it's the longest. You know, it's 6.5 months. So.
What I was going to say is that something that you see with a lot of SEALs, is that mentality is somewhat the same? You have to have that mentality. It's not so much a physical thing. It's more of a mental thing.
For sure it is. I mean, one of the adages I've heard to describe SEALs in terms of mentality is it's a common man with an uncommon will to succeed. And I think there's, you know, to talk to the athletic piece, you know, seeing like guys at the level that a lot of you and your clients have been at, you know, the top shelf UFC fighters, and like, you know, most of the guys that join the SEAL teams aren't at that level. I'd say they're above average athletically, but they're not star performers. And usually it's guys who are a little better than average, but were just obnoxiously competitive, like to the point where it was so hardwired in their DNA that, like, whether it's fucking bowling, putt-putt golf, like, you know, who can put the cart back faster at the grocery store. I mean, like, just everything is a competition. And that weird mentality, almost to, I would say, like an OCD level, just drives these guys to want to be the absolute best at everything. And it's pretty pervasive in training. You know, even in the SEAL team, I mean, something as simple as like a run, swim, run, like guys are tying each other's shoes together when they're in the water, so that when they get out and they're trying to put their shoes on, it's a rat nest, and taking their fins and throwing them, hiding them in the bushes, like it's a total.
Get the edge.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's
edge.
cutthroat, and everybody's down for it.
For sure. You talk a lot about genetic makeup. Like I was listening to another podcast and how you train, your dogs, right? We'll get into that in a little bit. But do you feel like that's something too as well? Is there like a genetic predisposition for Navy SEALs?
I think there is. I mean, it's something that ever since our inception in the early 60s up until as we're sitting here now, that kind of the administrations that have been in the leadership roles of the SEAL community have been trying to figure out what it takes and what kind of guy makes it, and what are the commonalities between people that start and finish. Mm-hmm. And to me, I really do think that there's just a genetic aspect to it that is just, I would say, kind of an anomaly. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say that it's even necessarily a good thing, in that if you think about it, if you take a step back and look at it kind of from an evolutionary standpoint, human beings, or any species for that matter, their primary goal is to perpetuate the species.
Yep.
With first responders, police, military, and especially like special operations that are at that super high level, there's kind of a disconnect, I think, from a self-preservation standpoint where that it doesn't really exist. And while that may sound, sexy in a movie or an interview or something, the grand scheme of the species, if you think about if most human beings possess that trait, we wouldn't be a species, right? Yeah. So I think just, again, evolutionarily speaking, there can only be a very small, probably a fraction of a percentage of the population that possesses that level of determination to succeed and does not possess that self-preservation thing because, again, we wouldn't exist. So I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think that the guys that make it, have a few of those things lined up, but that's kind of the backbone of what allows them to succeed. Because if you do have that, I think that's when it's going to creep into your mind.
I was going to say that probably organizational skills, like being very conscientious, knowing what the task is and following through with the task and being consistent, which would make anybody successful, right? Yeah. And I think that when I see, I'm close with Eddie Gallagher, right? I've talked to a few other SEALs, and they're always very consistent with what they do. I've been able to train some of them, been able to program for them, and they're like always wanting to know the details. Yeah. So detail orientated. Yeah. That's another big thing that I see.
It is, and that starts kind of day one in training. A lot of the things that you do don't make sense, or if young guys that are coming through, they're like, who gives a shit how the bed's made, or if the edge on my knife is sharper on one, or slanted on one side, or like if there's a grain of sand on the floor, what the fuck does that matter? Like, I came here to fight terrorists. Why do I need to clean my room? And really the backbone or the goal behind all that is, we want to make sure that you can pay an obnoxious amount of attention to detail for things that don't matter. Because if you can do that, then when they do matter, then we know that you're going to be solid. Because whether it's diving equipment, parachuting equipment, demolitions, explosives, I mean, you name it, navigation, parachuting when you're doing hay-hos where you're popping at 12,000 feet and navigating for 20 miles on night vision at night with 30 other dudes. Like, there are so many little things that you absolutely have to pay attention to, and if one of them is wrong, like several people can die from it. So
stakes are high
for sure. Yeah, so you just have to pay really, really close attention. And I will say it doesn't lend itself to healthy relationships outside of the SEAL community. Like I know I struggled with that as a husband and a father. Being too hard on your kids, expecting them to perform like your teammates, which just isn't going to happen. It does have some downsides for sure.
For sure. I want to get into that a little bit later, but let's keep going with the story. So now you joined the military. Yeah. What was the first day like in the SEALs, and how? Actually, let's go back to Buds. Yeah. What was the first day like there?
So it's pretty intimidating by design. When you first enter, you walk through the front doors and go into the quarterdeck. It's steeped in history. There's pictures and kind of monuments, and there's a guy standing watch, and then there's a SEAL instructor who is on duty that kind of roves around and whatever. And seeing videos and reading books and talking about that experience of checking into buds, it's so hyped up to where you're pretty nervous walking through there. And one thing I will say, like I gamed the system a little bit, knowing that if I came during working hours, it's going to be the worst because there's going to be a ton of people there. And so I checked in on a Sunday night, so there's basically nobody there. So it was kind of anticlimactic that way for me, but still just really powerful experience. Seeing the doors that every single SEAL who's ever existed has walked through at some point, and then right behind that is the grinder, which is this big cement area where everybody gets hammered incessantly throughout history of training. But then it's hey, here's your rack, and it's in an open bay with what's called X division at first before you could actually check in and try to get some sleep, and you're living out of a bag, and and then you check in the next morning, and then it's just really kind of a whirlwind of I wouldn't even say guys yelling at you. I mean, one of the big differences between boot camp and a lot of military experience versus the SEAL teams is guys are talking about like I am right now. Like there is some yelling, but a lot of it is what they're saying to you doesn't match the presence that they give. Like they're threatening you and calling you names or whatever, but they're doing it very like it's almost it kind of fucks with your head a little bit that way, So.
But I think you kind of need that, though, right?
Absolutely. I mean, because the mental component is such a big deal. Is that, and the whole kind of, I would say, structure or philosophy behind BUDS training is to make this 6-month period so stressful and make it as difficult as possible, and create an environment where every intangible that you can control is kind of maxed out 10 out of 10 to be a lot of mental and physical pressure, so that they know, when the shit hits the fan overseas or in a combat environment, you can't replicate combat. The closest you can do is what they do there. At the end of the day, as a student, you still know it's training. You still know at some point this is going to end. They do have my best interest in mind. They don't want to see me die. Overseas, it's the opposite.
Sure.
There's nobody looking out for you. You have populations actively trying to take your life, and so mimicking that environment to the best of your ability creates an environment where they can kind of sift through guys who are going to be able to withstand that kind of environment and those who can't.
What was the most memorable moment in BUDS?
That's a tough one. There's so many moments that stand out, but I guess in thinking of it, the first one that comes to mind was actually towards the end of training, where I had already been rolled once for I pinched my sciatic nerve and then failed everything. So it was actually a performance roll, but it was from an injury. And so I started with 214, made it almost all the way through training, got rolled right before San Clemente Island, which is the last 3-4 weeks of training, 4 or 5 weeks of training. And then so I had to start third phase all over again with the next class. Go all the way through third phase, get out to San Clemente Island, and we're doing these weapons breakdown tests where you take M60s and M4s and you break them all the way down and put them back together, and you have a certain amount of time to do it. Excuse me. And the M60 is a little bigger and a little more complex, or for me it was at least. I struggled with that more than any other weapon system, and I don't know why. I just... but I had a hard time with it, and you only get a couple of chances, but I failed the first one or two, and I was basically on my last shot. And I just, for me, it was kind of a defining moment because I had come so far. This is something, I'd been planning on for years, and here I was almost about to graduate. But if I fuck this up, I'm gonna get kicked out, And because I had already been rolled once, I'd have been dropped from training.
So it would have been it.
Yeah. So it's like, you're going into this where it's like, I've already failed this twice. If I don't pass this, if I fuck this up, and so the amount of pressure, especially for an 18-year-old.
Yeah, you were young.
Yeah, with all of that riding on me, it was just kind of like I had to slap myself and be like, dude, get in there, grab a hold of your nuts and kick this thing in the ass. And that was not that I didn't have to rely on myself to push through certain difficult moments, but that one, from a mental strength standpoint, was a defining moment for me, because it really taught me that, that my mind is what's going to get me through anything that I'm struggling with, no matter how stacked the deck seems like it is against me, if I want it bad enough and I talk myself into being able to do it, and I think I can do it, and I know I can do it, then I'll be able to do it. And it was just it was a powerful moment. But,
yeah. I was going to ask you, how great did it feel after you got it accomplished?
Man, I'll tell you, it was even more so than great. It was relieving to the point where almost like if you've almost been in a motorcycle or car accident, like it's that close.
Oh, okay.
That second afterward,
That type of feeling.
It was just like this like adrenaline dump, like weak in the knees, like you know, it was. I felt like such a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but it was like this weird adrenaline dump.
Sure.
You know? But
yeah. And that's not it. Like, so going through the hell week and then going into, was it phase 2? Is it phase 3?
Yeah, so you go through indoctrination, which is about 3 weeks, and then first phase is 8 weeks. That's Hell Week is about halfway through.
Okay.
And that's the basic conditioning phase and Hell Week. Second phase is 7 weeks, and it's all diving, combat swimmer. Third phase is 8 weeks or 9 weeks maybe, and it's all land warfare and navigating and stuff. But
with your background in swimming, did you excel in the swimming portion?
I didn't, and surprises a lot of people, but when I explain it, it probably makes more sense. So I started swimming competitively at like 5. You know, I was with these USS clubs and went to, you know, Junior Olympics and, you know, was you know, pretty successful with it. I did take a short break in junior high for about a year and a half, but then swam, you know, all through high school. And the one thing, like I'd never swam in open water. I'd never swam with fins, and I'd never swam, you know, where you can't see a black line on the bottom that you're guiding from.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So while I was a very strong swimmer and super comfortable in the water,
It's different.
The fins really fucked my ankles up because they're like 2x4s. They're not forgiving. They're not like freediver fins that bend.
And you were smaller,
tiny. Yeah, I mean, I was the same height I am now. I weighed like 140, and I just but like I couldn't gain weight. I mean, I remember.
Are you 5'10", 5'11"?
5'11", and I was like, I'm probably closer to 5'10" now after the spine compression.
Me too.
But
Me too.
yeah, it was like 5'11".
That's what happened to me.
And I was like 6'4".
Yeah. So see me in the lineup in football. I was 6 foot, 220.
Yeah. I mean, I was like 5'11" and 3/4. And but so I mean, I like every night after training, there was this little McDonald's in the country store, which is like a little base PX, it's like a convenience store on base right by the barracks. And it was just like this little mini McDonald's.
Yeah.
And I would get a double quarter pounder full meal, eat all of that, all the fries, and every night I would eat a box of oatmeal cream pies, all 10 of them.
Damn.
And a 64-ounce regular Gatorade before I went to bed.
Yeah, you got to get the Gatorade. You got to get the electrolytes.
Yeah. It's good stuff. And,
finish it off.
I mean, they didn't have LMNT packets in them. They didn't have that shit back then.
They didn't have battle tested.
Yeah. But so but like even then, like I couldn't gain a pound, and so
Sure.
Yeah, it was always a struggle for me size wise that way. But
Okay, so now we make it through. All right, what happens then? You get deployed, right? At some point.
Yeah. So once you graduate, buds, and back then you went to Fort Benning.
Okay.
For jump school, which is 3 weeks. They don't do that way anymore. Now you go through static line and free fall with a kind of a pipeline course right after training, which is a better way to do it. But after that, then you go through STT, SQT, which is another 4.5 or so months of. It kind of bridges the gap because when you graduate Buds isn't really a training program. I mean, you do learn some tactics and basic stuff like that, but it's more of a selection process just to see who has what it takes. And so instead of having guys go from Buds right to a SEAL team and being way behind, they put you through this kind of advanced training phase of about 4.5, 5 months of just kind of all the basic stuff. That's more of a gentleman's course where it's still physically demanding, but the instructors now aren't fucking with you. Like they're not trying to weed people out. They're legitimately trying to get you as educated and as well trained as possible, so that when you show up to the team, you're an asset and not a liability. So do that. Show up to SEAL Team 3, and then you go on 6 months of probation once you show up there, and you have to kind of go to every different department. You know, the Armory, the Air Ops, the boat unit. I mean, you name it, and get kind of signatures and signed off on by all the department heads to say, you know, this guy knows what he's doing. It's kind of like an OJT certification process. And then at the very end, you kind of take these tests and then ultimately have a Chiefs board where you walk in and there's like, 15, 20 salty dudes. And at that time, they seem like old guys. They're all younger than I am now, probably. They're like late 30s, early 40s. But, in that unit, that's an older guy for sure. Yep. And they can ask you anything. I mean, they may ask you, the cyclic rate of a weapon, the safe blast distance of PETN, explosive door charge. Tell me how to deflood a 55 engine, for the boats, how to, you name it. They can ask you any technical question they want. They ask you morality questions like, we're in this scenario and a guy shoots a hostage. What are you going to do about it? If this happens, are you going to say anything? Are you not going to say anything? Would you report this? Would you not report that? And even, stuff like you're on deployment and your chief is married and he's banging a hooker in Thailand. Are you going to say anything about, you name it. Man. Like they're asking you all kinds of stuff. And then usually at the end, like if you've kind of passed everything, and a lot of it I would say is a vibe check, for lack of better terms. I mean, yes, they want to make sure you know your stuff, but so much of it is just like, is this guy one of us or not?
Sure.
And they.
How nerve-wracking was that?
It's nerve-wracking, but for me at least, I can't say for everybody, it was less nerve-wracking than a lot of things because I felt like, dude, I've made it this far. Like all the things I've been through, like. I'm not going to say this was nothing. I mean, I was nervous, but it wasn't like the most nervous I've ever been. That's for sure.
At this point, you've been in it. You've already really went through the hard, demanding physical and mental situations that you had to go through.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, there are guys that get cut there. It's not often. But I mean, like, can you imagine? Like, they're just like, you're just not one of us. You're out of here. It's like, holy shit. I mean, it's like 2 years of getting kicked in the nuts nonstop, and. I guess I've already been swearing a lot. I don't know if that's something you want to
you're good. You're good. Yeah. Don't worry.
Probably should have asked that 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, you're all right.
But so make it through that. And it was neat. Like they do mess with you a little bit. Like at the end, I think if they like you and you pass, they'll throw kind of a joke or a curveball at you. And mine was pretty funny. It was this old salty, like Master Chief was like, let's say you and I are camping and it's just the two of us, and we're drinking one night, we're sharing a tent. We get, totally shit-faced, and you wake up the next morning, and your ass is sore, and there's a condom hanging out of it.
Oh, man.
Are you going to tell anybody? And I was like, the fuck kind of question is that? And I was like, no, I'm probably not going to say anything about that. And they all laughed, and he goes, you want to go camping? And I was just like, man, this motherfucker.
Yeah, we got to it's, I'm all right. I'm good.
I'm going to pass on that one. But
sure.
So usually, like, they'll only do stuff like that if they like you and you pass.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
Yeah, so after that, now it's like, now it's official. The next, I think that was like on maybe a Tuesday or Wednesday, and that Friday, there was a handful of us that were all in that boat, that were new guys that were, trying to get to that point. So then at Friday, every morning at a SEAL team, you do what's called a muster, which is just you meet at like 7 or 7:15 maybe, and everybody gets together. Each platoon is kind of standing in their own little group, and then the commanding officer and the executive officer and the command master chief walk down these steps. Everybody's standing there at attention. They call everybody to muster or whatever, and they put out whatever word they have for the day, and then usually everybody scatters and you go work out and then start your training. But on this particular day, because we were getting our tridents, we're in our dress camis and they come down, and then that's when they pin you and you hit the surf, and then you spend the rest of the day in your PT gear with that trident stuck in your chest. And anybody who has had their trident, they don't do it anymore, I don't think, but because it's politically correct now and what have you.
Let's talk. Well, we're not gonna talk about it too much, but
the
differences now between
it's huge.
then and
it's huge. I mean, like back then, it was wide open COX. I mean, nobody cared, and it was just part of the deal. And so anybody that had their trident before you could walk up and pull it out, and then either punch it, elbow it, whatever, back in, and with just the prongs. There's no backs on, so it's stuck in your chest all day long.
Amazing.
And guys will do it 5 or 6 times if they don't like you, or they do like you, whatever. But they'll just come out, they'll pull it out, and punch it back in, and but at that point it's like just kind of that rite of passage thing.
Gotcha.
And then that night everybody goes out to. There's a couple of little like SEAL dive bars in Coronado that Danny's and McPee's are the two main ones. And you go out there and go drink. And of course, I'm 19 at the time, so like I was in there, shouldn't have been, but
it was a different time.
It was a different time. It's 90, 97, 98.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
All right, guys, so check it out. As a busy person, I got a business, multiple businesses. I'm a strength coach, so I coach multiple world champions. And then also, not to mention, I'm a family man. I got 3 kids and I got a wife. So stress levels can be high. Now, what does that mean? Well, one, we have to figure out how stressed am I? And so for that, I like to get my basic biomarkers checked, meaning I get my labs done every 3 to 6 months. Now, why is it important? Well, first off, we need to have something that can combat what I'm going through. If I'm stressed out, I need to have the supplementation and I need to have the nutrition to combat those things, to allow me to be optimal for years on end so that I can maintain my level of progression and help the people that I need to help. And that's why I partnered with Merrick Health. Now, they are a full health and wellness provider that will give you the necessary tools, the supplementation, and also the lab work you need to understand how well you're actually performing. Now, with that being said, if you want to check it out, I highly recommend it. That's why I partner with them. If you go to merrickhealth.com, you can go ahead and use the discount code DARU and get 10% off your lab testing. Remember what I said, know where you're at so that you can combat those stresses and stay optimal for your performance for whatever you're doing.
So first deployment, what was going through your mind?
That was pretty nerve-wracking too. I mean, we had spent about 2.5 years, almost 2.5 years doing our workup, which is abnormal. Usually it's about a year, but we were going out on a ship, an amphibious readiness group. So so we were on boats and after our year and change workup, then we did about another year's worth of fleet exercises. So we're on carriers and guided missile cruisers and all kinds of different Navy ships doing exercises for a week or 2 off of them, and we're doing like maritime interdiction stuff, fast roping, visit board search and seizure, over the beach assaults, all kinds of stuff. And that was pretty neat because it was my first real kind of introduction to the regular Navy and being on boats and seeing kind of what that's like and understanding how the fleet works and all that. And so cool experience, but then now we go deploy, and it was, I'd say, equally beneficial in that we kind of had a good mix of not just deploying straight to one spot and being there the whole time. We went to Hawaii, Australia, Guam, Kwajalein, Channel Islands, Thailand, the Philippines. I mean, we were all over the place. Wow. And Hong Kong. I mean, so we got to go all over the world, which was pretty awesome. Cool. And work with a lot of different host nation forces and Singapore. I mean, we just bounced all over the place, and so it was neat to get to experience all of that, and work with a lot of different groups. But then a good ways through deployment, we were in Australia. We jumped on a guided missile cruiser and floated to Bahrain. And then while we were in Bahrain is when the USS Cole got bombed, which was October of 2000. And so that was the first kind of real punch in the mouth from Al-Qaeda to the United States. Now, they had bombed some embassies in the Horn of Africa a few years prior, and it had done some little, I say little, I mean, obviously they were big deals, but never any like direct assaults on American forces or assets. And so as soon as that happened, we jumped on the Tarawa, floated down there, and then we babysat the USS Cole. We were on the USS Duluth and babysat it from sundown to sunup every day for 63 days straight.
Damn.
Because what happened is, I don't know how familiar you are with the story, but at that time,
2000. You said 2000. 2000. Yeah, I was a baby.
Yeah. So
let's do this.
Yeah. So
you weren't even born.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around that time, especially if you were already if you were an adult prior to 9/11.
Yeah.
The difference in our nation's mentality from a foreign policy standpoint prior to 9/11 versus after 9/11 is about a polar opposite. It's hard to imagine the way things were back then, but if you can imagine it, back then USS ships, naval warships would pull into foreign ports for resupply, for fuel, for food, you name it. So the USS Cole is pulling into Yemen, the port of Aden. They bring 2 tugboats up, and they are moving it into port for a resupply. One of those tugboats had been replaced by some Al Qaeda affiliates, and it had a couple thousand pounds of explosives on it. Damn. So they bring it up alongside, clack themselves off, blow this 20-foot hole in the side of the boat, and luckily or thankfully, the damage control protocols on the ship were sufficient enough to keep it from sinking. Now, granted, it was like half sunk and listing pretty heavy in the water, but it didn't sink. Killed 19 sailors, and their goal was to sink it though. Like they considered success sinking the ship, and so they came over the open airway and said, hey, that ship's not leaving the harbor. We will sink it. It's not leaving. So that's why we show up. And so period of darkness every night. We had a 60 gunner, a sniper team, a comms element, and then 4 roving patrols with M4s on the Cole. And then there were 2 of the little fast mover, the 10-meter ribs, rigid hold inflatable boats that were floating around that boat. And myself and a handful of other guys were on there. We had an M60, a 50 cal, a Mark 19 grenade launcher, and then each guy had his M4. And so we were basically just patrolling that area, making sure that nobody would come in and sink. And they, tested the water a few times, but we went right up on them and drew down on them immediately and never fired any shots. And never
firefights, nothing.
Yeah, never mixed it up with them. But so we managed to get it out of the harbor and got it loaded onto a dry dock, a floating dry dock, and then they sailed it back to Mississippi and fixed everything, and now it's deploying again. So, but that was, for me, having not really done anything real world prior and not having really been faced with seeing, there's 19 dead bodies that are mangled and lodged in this ship, and we're on it, and it's sitting in 90-degree water with no air conditioning. Like, it's a smell I'll never forget, but knowing, like the first couple nights we stayed on the Cole, there's 16 of us, there's 19 guys killed. So like we're sleeping in these guys' bunks. The other guys in a room this size is going to have like, 25 dudes sleeping in it. Everybody's, so it's like these guys that had just lost a lot of their friends and fellow sailors are looking at us like with a 1,000-foot stare. We're sleeping in their buddy that just got killed rack. And, so it was a pretty surreal moment and made everything pretty real. Like it made me understand, like, while yes, this is what I signed up for, like it became a pretty sobering experience right away of like these guys are trying to kill us and they're going to continue to do so and it's game on now.
You were 19, 20 years old?
At that time I was 21.
21? Yeah. It's a lot for a 21-year-old.
It was, yeah. And so, we did that for 2 months. And then the cool, I say cool, the nice thing that was after that was that because of that happened, they said, okay, we're not going to have USS ships pull into ports anymore. We will have USNS ships, which are merchant marine vessels. They're not active duty military.
Okay.
They're tankers and supply ships and stuff. So what the deal was they were going to have one port, which ended up being Dubai, which is not a bad place to go. Jebel Ali is the big port there. So we stayed in Dubai, and we're going to have USNS ships pull into Jebel Ali. They'll get the resupply. They'll go back out into international waters and do an underway replenishment with all the USS ships. So now there's kind of a compartmentalized method to resupply all of the Navy ships all over the world without putting them in danger.
Gotcha.
So our job was to go to Dubai and stay there. And each time a ship came in, we would dive under the tugboats and make sure that they were legit and didn't have explosives on them. We'd have a sniper overwatch on the tower. We'd sweep through all of the warehouses, check all the pallets of goods. Brought dogs in, and we're doing searches with them. And so we spent like almost a month and a half doing that. And then,
how frequently would they come in?
It was most days, I would say, because that was the only place they were doing it. So basically the entire U.S. Navy fleet, all of their resupplies were being done out of the port of Jebel Ali at that time. So it was pretty busy. I mean, there was days here and there that we had off, but it's cool, being in Dubai, especially after being in Yemen for 2 months.
Sure.
It's pretty
You've
big
been some good places, though.
Yeah.
Right, with Singapore. And, You know what I mean? Like, mostly, these guys get in and they're going right to Iraq, Afghanistan, Not to say that you didn't have it rough by any means. Let's get into that, though, like as far as when you got into the thick of things? This had to be after the Twin Towers, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so we got home from that deployment in early 2001. 9/11 happens. I was in between platoons, basically. We were getting ready to start the next platoon. So obviously, being on the West Coast, like I was on my way to work when it happened, So by the time I got to work, they had already shut all the gates down to where they were basically treating every single person coming through like a drug interdiction stop that you'd see on the highway. It was like pulling everything out of the car.
Wow.
Searching everybody, and these are active duty SEALs with IDs coming through, but so it took like 6 hours to get on base, finally get on base. And as you can imagine, like the tension and everything was pretty palpable. It was very quiet. Everybody had a kind of a stoic seriousness to them that was, that was super powerful. But everybody was just kind of doing what they could to get their shit ready. And there was just kind of an understanding that, dude, we're going to war for sure, So from that day forward, it was just not that we weren't training serious before or had the understanding that we may be, in combat, but now it was like you are for sure going, and it's going to be gnarly, So
I don't want to draw the similarities, but when we look at fighting, like if we're getting ready for a fight, it's pretty difficult because you train year round, right? But the intensity really don't pick up until you actually have a date.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, obviously this is way different when it comes down to it. But
to me, the principle is the exact same.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure it is. It's like, it's not that you're not training hard knowing that you're going to fight before, but now it's like, I know who I'm fighting. I know when I'm fighting, it puts a lot more kind of at stake for it. And all of our training blocks, we were using kind of real-time intelligence and influence to influence the target packages and the training scenarios and making it as kind of realistic as possible. We went through our entire workup, and then one of the things that I think may surprise some people is, the SEAL teams still have other responsibilities doing exercises and doing things in other parts of the world, even right after 9/11. And so we got the bad news that after all of this, it was like, we need you guys to go to Guam and do all of our, our Southwest Asia or Southeast Asia rather exercises and do that deployment. And we were like, are you fucking kidding me? So we thought,
especially the guys like you, type,
I mean, so we here we are getting ready to go to Afghanistan, and then they're like, nope, we need you to go to Guam. And it was like, you got to be kidding me. So. Not luckily, but we end up obviously getting to go to Iraq anyway. But so we go to Guam. We spent the first, 3 or 4 months of the deployment doing, the Philippines, and Thailand, Hong Kong, the whole Southeast Asia type stuff, which in the Philippines was actually pretty interesting because unbeknownst to a lot of people, even ourselves, in many ways, there was a pretty heavy Al-Qaeda affiliate syndicate in the Philippines, down in the south. You've got, there's 3 kind of different parts to the country, and you got Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Mindanao, which is the southern part, is a southern chain of islands, is predominantly Muslim, very extremist oriented, whereas Luzon up at the top is a lot like America. It's, so it's a pretty disparate nation that way. But so we ended up going to the Philippines and spending about 6 weeks there and training with the Filipino SEALs and getting them ready to go fight the Abu Sayyaf and Moro Islamic Liberation Front down in the south. And so that was pretty neat. We didn't get to go down and actually help them, but basically everything leading up to and including them going down there and doing it, we helped train them and stuff, which was pretty cool.
How up to speed were they?
Not very up to speed. Yeah. The caliber of dudes was good, but it was wild. We did this jungle survival training course for like 10 days where we're, learning to survive in the jungle basically by these guys. And for these guys, it's like, it's a normal day for them. There were months that they wouldn't get paid, and when we looked at the conversion rate, we were like, what do you guys make? And it was like $17 a month. You know, it was like nothing, you know, and they'd go 3 or 4 months without getting paid sometimes. And so these guys are living off the land anyway, you know, but it was really cool to get to see how inventive and resourceful they were. I mean, they took, it's like they didn't have fins, as an example, and we're running these ranges. We brought these really thick, like polyurethane silhouette shooting targets, you know, just a silhouette of a man, but it's really thick plastic, you know, so that they'll last a while. So for us, like, we bring the targets, we got staple guns, spray glue, and all of the stuff to set up a basic shooting range, do our shooting range with them, and then we're getting ready to clean up, and they're like, no, we'll clean it up. So they take these targets and cut fin-shaped patterns out of all of them, and then took the green duct tape, the rigger's tape, and if you take a long strand of it and roll it over on itself, it becomes like a really heavy-duty rope.
Yep.
And so they show up the next day, we're doing a swim with fins that they had made out of fucking tape and our silhouettes. And, like, they were just stoked.
That's crazy.
Like, for them, it was like Christmas morning. They're like, holy shit, you guys are going to throw this stuff away? And we're like, how the fuck did you make that out of it? You know, it's just
true MacGyvers.
Yeah, you know, but, like, that's their whole life. I mean, they're making shit out of nothing, you know? And
well, it's funny how, it's interesting how resourceful you can be when you don't have anything.
I mean, to me, it reminded me of things you see in prison. You know, it's like shit that they're making knives and you know, hooch out of, and I mean, it's just like, who the fuck would have thought of that? But it's like, well, yeah, when you're sitting in a concrete box 23 hours a day for 9 years, turns out your imagination can come up with some stuff. So so that was cool. It was a neat experience. I also, they put me through an 8-month total immersion Tagalog language program. When I re-enlisted that time, I re-enlisted to go to Arabic, and the last minute, they're like, nope, you're going to Guam, so we're going to send you to learn Filipino instead. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, what am I going to do with Filipino? Turns out I ended up using it. But so that was kind of neat. I wouldn't say that I'm fluent. I mean, I can still use it a little. It is.
That's a tough one, though.
But, you know, it came in handy a few times, which was kind of neat. But, Wow. So we leave there, go back to Guam, and at this point, now it's like late 2002, and all of the rumblings within the government are kind of like, hey, Iraq is spinning up. There's a good chance we're going to be going in. So just be ready kind of thing. And about a month after that, it was, you guys are for sure going. Team 5's coming to backfill you here, which they were not happy about because they were supposed to go originally. And then they're like, no, we're going to send Team 3 and you guys are going to go to Guam.
Can you explain a little bit about the different teams?
So now there's, I would say, almost no difference between every SEAL team. Back when I came in, each team had their own area of operational expertise. Team 3 back then was the desert warfare platoon. So we were the only team that wore desert camis. We did all of the long-range desert reconnaissance stuff. All of our tactics, our land warfare stuff, everything was centered around desert warfare. SEAL Team 1 was jungle. Team 5 was cold weather and strike platoon stuff, North Korea, et cetera. On the East Coast, you had SEAL Team 2, which was Europe and cold weather. Team 4 was South America. And Team 8 was strike platoons off of carriers that were kind of a quick response. They would deploy to a carrier and float around waiting to be like a quick response kind of thing. So the neat part about that is that there were guys who had spent 15, 20 years doing nothing but jungle warfare stuff, so they were really good at it. Same with the desert stuff, same with, everything. The downside is that, you're kind of pigeonholed there where the guys who spent 15 years at Team 3 didn't know anything about the jungle and vice versa. So
you become a specialist inside of a specialty program.
Whereas traditionally, they wanted SEALs to be more kind of jack of all trades. You need to be good at everything, maybe not an expert at any one thing. And so around 2001 or so, they kind of revamped the whole thing and made each SEAL team basically a jack of all trades. And so now no team deployed to any one spot. It was wherever they needed you. And so your workup was more well-rounded. You would do a little bit of everything. And so it's kind of mixed feelings as to whether or not that was a positive or not. I mean, there's just like with most things, pros and cons. But but so now instead of having 2 platoons from every team be deployed all the time, Now entire SEAL teams were deploying, and so from the West Coast, an entire team would be deployed all the time.
Gotcha.
Then you have SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1 and 2, which are those little mini black submarines. Mm-hmm. One of them is in Little Creek, the other one is in Pearl Harbor. And then you have SEAL Team 6, which is in Virginia Beach also, and they're the Tier 1 anti-terrorism specialty unit, the same way Delta or CAG is.
Gotcha. Makes sense now.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So I didn't mean to cut you off on
No,
that.
no.
I just want to clear that up. Mm-hmm. So now, what was next?
So now, as we're getting ready to go, we knew that it's just a matter of time, basically. And so they said we're going to go to Kuwait, mm-hmm. and you guys are going to be on the Kuwaiti naval base, right on the Arabian Gulf coast, and we're going to sit there and basically prepare for our first kickoff mission, which was the oil platforms. So from the first Gulf War up until 2003, when we went in, there were really heavy sanctions and oil embargoes on Iraq. That was kind of how we were crippling them. Well, Saddam still was smuggling a lot of oil out of the country, and he was doing it with these two oil platforms. It was the what was it, Maybot and Kayad. It was the Mina al-Bakr oil terminal and the Khor al-Amat terminal. So these two oil terminals that are like 1,600 yards long.
Okay.
Could fit 4 big oil tankers at a time. And then there was this manifold metering station on land like 30 miles away. Between the manifold metering station and these oil terminals, this 25, 30-mile stretch has this huge group of 48-inch pipes that are full of oil, that are pumping them. Now, that amount of mileage and those size pipes, if those were to burst and it flood into the Gulf, it would be the worst oil spill in human history. Like it would dwarf any tanker that you've ever seen. There's like 50 tankers worth of oil in those pipes. So it was a huge strategic mission for us as a country and for Iraq to try to make us look bad. Their goal was if an attack is imminent and we're for sure going to do this, they were going to blow those pipes and flood the Gulf and then blame us, and now we're the bad guys that just ruined the entire Arabian Gulf. And our goal was obviously to prevent that from happening while also taking control of them. So all of SEAL Team 3, which is 200 and some SEALs at once, we took all 3 of them down, which was the largest single mission in naval special warfare history, and still is to this day. Wow. Which was a pretty neat thing to be a part of. Yeah. But we had about 5 weeks of training leading up to that. I mean, we even built a replica, like using stakes and line out in the middle of the desert to stake off this 600-yard long target. And the way it was set up is basically you've got a berthing section. It was like 4 stories and all metal buildings, similar to what you'd find on a ship. And then 1,600 meters of scaffolding and little docking stations where boats would pull up and offload the oil. So we are getting ready for this mission just day in, day out, running SWAT team kind of stuff, CQB, CQC, clearing rooms, mimicking that target to the best of our ability. I was the intelligence representative for the platoon, so I was gathering the intel for the target package from whether it was CIA, DIA, Air Force intelligence, Army intelligence, Navy intelligence, and trying to kind of corroborate all of it to give us as accurate of a depiction of what that target's going to be like when we get on board. And as time went on, it got kind of worse and worse in terms of what they were saying that target was going to be resistance-wise. And at the height of, like right before we went and as bad as it got, they had said that there was over 100 soldiers on board and that they had explosives on all of the pipes rigged to blow, and they were going to wait for us to get on board and then blow it up as soon as we got on board and kill all of us. Yeah. And so, it's a pretty daunting thing to think that, like, hey, our intelligence is saying this is what's going to happen. Yeah. We did have SDVs dive and get some intel in-house on it beforehand. Myself and my OIC flew in helicopters at like 12,000 feet with zoom lenses hanging out of it, taking pictures of the target 2 days before we took it down. But at the end of the day, it was like that didn't confirm or deny. It was like, maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. We don't know, but we're going anyway because it's strategically it's too big of a target to not take it over. So, you know, the cottonmouth was pretty real on the boat ride there, getting ready to do it, thinking there's 100 dudes and it's going to blow up when we jump on board. But it's just one of those like, hey, this is a defining moment, you know, not to compare that to D-Day, but it was like, we kind of assumed like there's a good chance we're not gonna make it through this one.
At that moment where you're like, well, this is why I signed up for this.
Yeah. I mean, it was nerve-wracking, but there's a weird, and again, you know, I think there's a lot of parallels between professional fighting, especially MMA fighting, because it's so well-rounded. I imagine that, you know, in a camp, like during the walkout, it's like you guys together feel like a fucking team, you know, and it's like you feel invincible. And so like being with that crew of dudes, you know, jumping on a boat, it was like modern day Vikings, you know, it's just like everybody's ready to just get their shit on.
I like that.
So yeah, I mean, we're on these boats hauling ass, and we got all our shit on hanging off the rails, and we just fucking attacked it and managed to take 26. There's 26 guys on board, so a few more than us, but still close in numbers. But we managed to. We were there at about 2 a.m. is when we took it down and caught them completely off guard somehow. But most of them were asleep. A few of them were awake, but we just flooded the target, took it down, took 26 prisoners. Wow. Didn't lose any of our guys. And, you know, they did have explosives on board. They didn't have them rigged to blow, thank God. And when we interrogated them, like, you know, we hogtied all of them and started interrogating them. And the recurring theme with all of them was that, and I would say the mistake that Saddam made in telling them to do that was he didn't give them any evacuation route. And so it was basically a suicide mission for them too, and they weren't willing to do it. Which, you know, years later, as you get more into the Al-Qaeda and ISIS type of opponents, you know, those guys were more than willing to do stuff like that, you know. So these were, you know, Iraqi Republican Guard guys, Saddam Fedayeen guys. There was a couple of Iraqi Navy divers, and then some oil worker personnel. But so, you know, went off largely without a hitch. Like I said, none of us. I mean, we had a couple of injuries, but it was just dumb shit like cutting yourself on broken glass and you know, just little shit like that. Yeah. And so, so we finished that. Jump on a fast catamaran and went back to Kuwaiti Naval Base. And then we drove up to Ali Salim Air Force Base 2 days later, and then the war kicked off. So we essentially kind of kicked off the war, which was kind of neat. The 1st Marine Division just launched across the border, and